public librarian on this panel today, so yay. I run the Washington Memorial Library in Macon, Georgia, with a staff of 23. We are also the head library for administration within the Middle Georgia Regional Library System.
Great. Okay, so Brooke, I'd like you to start for us if you don't mind. Tell us about this WebJunction class. Something about,
Sure.
What motivated you to create the class? What are your goals for the class? And what kind of impact has this class had so far?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. I'm really thrilled to be with you today and really happy to be included in this conversation about how libraries can be partners in access to justice. As I said, I'm Brooke Doyle from WebJunction, and our tagline is the learning place for libraries. We launched in 2003, and WebJunction has helped more than 160,000 learners build their knowledge, skills, and confidence to deliver transformational services to their communities. So we are a free online learning platform that connects library staff to skills and ideas to help their libraries thrive. Our primary audience is US public libraries, but we are available to any library, anywhere, anytime. And we always have folks from around the world popping into our webinars. It's really fun. I want to emphasize that it's free, so you just can set up an account. It's not too arduous of a process. And we do offer free professional development and continuous learning opportunities. So we have a huge catalog of webinars and classes, and we are constantly trying to kind of find out what are the current needs of library staff and how can we help meet those. Volunteer, all stages of a librarian's career path. So beginning, volunteers, far along in your journey. So the reason I'm here today is because of our legal content. So the Legal Services Corporation, and I'll call them LSC, you probably are familiar with them. They're one of the main funders of legal aid across the US. And they're very concerned about the justice gap, that gap between the legal needs of folks and resources to meet those needs. And I learned that 10 counties in Georgia have no lawyers at all, and 25 counties have 10 lawyers or fewer. So the justice gap is very real in Georgia. LSC looked to WebJunction when they were interested in trying to close the justice gap and thinking of different ways to do it, and trying to think of more access points for legal information. So what are some maybe creative solutions that we hadn't thought of where to access legal information? And libraries came up as a possibility. They WebJunction, and they came to us because we were really the place to go for professional development for public library staff. So we have partnered with LSC since 2018 to help equip libraries to play a role in access to justice. We wondered, when they approached us, if this topic would be interesting to librarians and if the topic would be too daunting, but we wanted to give it a try, and LSC was very excited that we wanted to try. So in 2019, we had support from private funding. They contracted with us to develop and deliver online training to instruct public librarians on how to help patrons find civil legal information and connect them with additional resources. So we've designed courses aimed at strengthening public library staff's knowledge, skills, and confidence to identify where a legal issue is present, and then to direct users to relevant, helpful information. So that might be information they could give them right then, or it might be connecting them to further expertise. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the public libraries today. I don't know when the last time you've been in a public library, and I hope it's recently. And Mac will talk a little bit more later about what's going on in public libraries today, but we're about a lot more than books. And public libraries do really make sense for folks as a point of legal information because of some of the things you see here. Public libraries have reliable technology and internet connections. Sometimes that's one of the few places you can find really reliable free public internet. In addition, printers, faxes, phones, all these different ways that we transact legal business. Library staff are skilled information professionals, and they also are really skilled at navigating technology. So we're seeing a lot today that library staff are really playing the role of like a digital navigator, helping people navigate this world of technology that many of us are somewhat unfamiliar with. The public library is a public space that is familiar to a lot of people, and it's not associated with the government, even though it is a government agency, but it's not, it doesn't feel like a court, let's say. It doesn't feel as intimidating. It's free, of course, and we have longer hours than a lot of, typical businesses, open on the weekends, open into the evenings. People feel comfortable walking into a library in a way that they don't into a courthouse or maybe even a law office. And there's 16,000 libraries in the United States. So they really are tucked away in little nooks and crannies that really there may not be a whole lot else going on, but there is a public library. Public libraries have an established and trusted relationship with the community. And really, we've seen in our work that legal services can partner and really benefit from that the trust that the public library has already developed. And then we both have the shared goal of providing resources to the community. So I hope that gives you an idea of some of the ways that libraries might be a great partner in this work and why LSC thought libraries made sense to invest in training their staff. For the audience today, I'd like to encourage you to think a little bit about put yourself in a public librarian's shoes. They are not lawyers. Law is intimidating. It is complex. It is ever changing. And librarians have been told, rightfully, that there is that line between information and advice that cannot be crossed. So this topic does feel pretty intimidating. So we've really designed the courses with that in mind. So trying to help folks get comfortable and feel that confidence that I keep mentioning. And as you know, the stakes of these interactions are often very high. So by the time someone might show up to a library and say, I'm going to be evicted in 2 days, it's those interactions are tense and stressful. Or I feel like I'm going to lose my kid, or the school system is doing this to my child. I mean, these are high stakes situations. So it is really, it's a difficult topic. We were a little daunted by this task. So if you talk to library staff, it's sometimes a funny sort of conversation starter to be like, what's the funniest thing or craziest thing you've ever heard at the reference desk? All sorts of things show up at the reference desk. And many times it's topics that you do not know anything about. And that's part of the skill of a librarian, is that they know how to find and navigate information. So these are just some examples of things that might show up at a reference desk. And it doesn't necessarily present itself as a law, as a legal issue, as a legal situation. But part of the goal of the course is to kind of think about what legal issues might be underneath a person's question and how to ask the right questions to get at the legal issue to then send them to the right person or agency or the next level of services. So that's part of what our courses are doing, is kind of training librarians who are trained in doing reference and trained in doing a reference interview, but how to put that legal spin on it. What are those buzzwords you want to be listening for? Like, oh, this could be a landlord-tenant issue. I'm going to ask these questions. So with the charge from LSC, we developed 4 online self-paced courses, and they are, they're designed to be a sequence, but it's not necessary that you take them in that order, especially if, you had a basic familiarity with the legal system. You probably wouldn't necessarily need to do course 1. But that first course really lays the groundwork for kind of how the legal system works, talks about the justice gap, talks about that line between information and advice. The second course is really about collecting or curating your civil legal resources. And part of the challenge of our course at Web Junction is, since we're a national organization and law is so local, we can't sort of give you the nuance of what this looks like in your area. So that's really, as a pedagogical strategy, it's a good thing to kind of say, okay, so here's some general principles of, for example, landlord-tenant law. And now go figure out what that looks like in your area and do some digging around and figure out who are what are some resources that would be really common to help your patrons, and also then who are some of the players that you could be referring folks to. So it's helping kind of curate that legal collection that's typical to your area or relevant to your area. The third course is about finding and partnering. So a huge amount of this of access to justice work is partnering. So who are the people in your area that could really be helpful to patrons coming in? So legal aid is a real obvious partner. Who are the legal aid providers in your area, and what are the what are the areas that they can be really helpful, and what are their qualifications? So if you make a referral there, how does someone qualify for their services? You don't want to make a referral and then have it be, they don't qualify and that was just a wasted time. So, but it's also connected to the courts. So who at the court would be a really good place to send folks? Who is, what is that form that they might need to ask for when they get to the court? So, and also some of those specialty areas. So maybe you have a lot of military in your community and a lot of veterans issues would come up. So can you make a connection with the veterans agency, and who's the person there that should be called? So it's doing some of that homework, like the course, the videos and things give you the kind of high level of, here are some possible people to connect with, and then you go do some homework around, all right, let's figure out what this looks like in our community. And the last is conducting that legal reference interview, which I referenced before. So it's putting that legal spin on a reference interview, which librarians are familiar with doing. And we have a lot of, we have some branching scenarios, some little like sort of choose your own adventure. So you play the librarian and the patron comes in and asks this question, and what would you say to her or him? And then you branch accordingly. And then it suggests that people do some practice with colleagues, neighbors, partners, etc. So we feel like these are a nice package of courses that give folks a good grounding in legal, providing legal information. So these are the numbers. We launched in 2020, actually right as the pandemic hit. And we're really pleased with these numbers. Don't get too focused on enrolled versus completed, because it's pretty technical what completion counts for. And a lot of people, completion they don't need to complete. They don't need to watch every video to the end. They just need to, that's not important to them. They just need the content. So we are really happy with those numbers. Lots of folks were highly satisfied with these courses. Over 2/3 of folks rated them, the usefulness as 5 out of 7 or higher. They increased their knowledge and confidence as we hoped. They were able to apply the course content by developing their own resources, so LibGuides and et cetera, on different civil legal topics. And they shared their knowledge with colleagues, which to us are all signs of success. And several were talking about their partnerships that they began to initiate with other organizations. So we're really thrilled with the uptake of these courses. And I pulled the numbers for Georgia, and the Georgia numbers are, they're low, but that's okay, because that means there's lots of opportunity, and that's why we're here today. So I would say, the courses could be part of an answer to kind of talking about access to justice in Georgia. I wanted to share a few examples of ways states are doing kind of a systematic rollout of legal training for public libraries, not all just WebJunction related. So Maryland in particular, I will hold up as a real exemplar. They have a partnership between their state law library, their Access to Justice Commission, and their, Conference of Court Law Librarians, where they have developed a standardized statewide curriculum that they deliver to public library staff across the state. And they have basic, like a foundational kind of course, like with the topics that I just discussed. And then they have some specialized follow-on ones like landlord, tenant, and family. And they really are an exemplar, and I could definitely connect you with folks in Maryland. I would point out that having some real champions of this is really important. So folks at like those 3 agencies I listed at the beginning who all care about this and have decided this is a priority is really important. And then to have a statewide rollout is fantastic. South Dakota is a different way of doing it. They made the WebJunction legal courses the focus of their Public Library Institute one year, which is something they hold every year as. And again, it was sponsored by the state library. So they had that higher level kind of buy-in and incentivization to make this work. Okay, just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. I do want to highlight a couple of examples of partnerships between legal aid and libraries. So these are fairly common. I mean, you probably have heard of, or I hope you've heard of, lawyer in the library programs, where a legal aid agency would partner with a public library. It could also be a law firm that's just doing pro bono work that says, like, once a month we come in and we have a clinic in the evening and people make appointments, say for like 15 minutes or something, to get free legal advice from an attorney. And the library is providing the space, again, that trusted community resource, is providing those extra, it's usually libraries are accessible, convenient location, and they are able to make those connections. And these are really good for situations that don't need an ongoing relationship with an attorney, but do need some legal expertise. Ongoing relationship with an attorney. So you might have an appointment at Lawyers in the Library and then realize, you know what, this is going to be a longer term thing. And so I'm going to refer you to my agency and, come on Monday and we'll talk further and we'll connect you with a lawyer. Or it could be like, wow, we just solved it in 15 minutes because I've got an expert who's an attorney who knows these issues. So those are really common. They're obviously done in person before COVID and then went virtual during COVID. And some places have continued doing some kind of hybrid model because the virtual has been so convenient for people. Sometimes that can be phone. So the library is really just making that matchmaking. So they're getting the word out to the community. Maybe when someone comes to the reference desk and says, hey, I have this issue, you can say, hey, I'd like to set you up with a phone appointment with when our Lawyer in the Library program's happening. Or the library can provide that technology and connecting with an attorney who's somewhere else. Another variation on this is expungement clinics. So a lot of the libraries do workforce development, and often libraries we're finding like we're only getting so far in our workforce development because the patrons have a criminal history and they just can't apply for these jobs. They're just getting blocked. And so they realize that expungement could be a real option to open up some doors and remove some barriers. And as I understand it, which I hope the lawyers will correct me if I'm wrong, that expungement can be a fairly straightforward process. It does, there's obviously steps involved in documentation, but it can be done, and it is such a huge thing for accessing employment. So we've heard of examples of libraries doing this remotely and in person, where again, the library is providing that connection with the lawyers, whether it's in the library physically or just connecting patron in the library, attorney somewhere else, and the library is providing the technology connection and even headsets and things, so there's some more privacy there. So these are just great examples of partnerships that have been really successful, and also really reaching the rural communities that have often left behind here. So if I've convinced you that librarians and libraries are a great partner in access to justice, I would say to the law audience, reach out, introduce yourself. Libraries would love to have your assistance, and it can be as simple as walk into your local library and introduce yourself. If it's a small library, anybody that you find will get you to the right person. If it's a bigger library, you might want to start with the reference desk and the reference department. And so you can talk about, what are they doing related to legal reference if a patron came in, and find out kind of where they are and what services you might be able to provide. For example, if you know a lot about landlord tenant, and you could maybe you could do a little lunch and learn with the library staff about this is what landlord tenant laws and issues look like in our county or our community. And here's some things where if you're going to refer folks to my agency, here's what a warm handoff would look like. And then learn about what the library's doing, and just be a real listener and figure out how you could partner and help. And I would say connecting to those relevant players is really important. This is not librarians' world. And so you live in the legal world, and what can you do to connect? Like, the county clerk at the court clerk, connect them to the library folks and figure out how they can make those really smooth referrals and smooth handoffs. Do you know someone in tenants' rights that could come do a session in the evening for patrons? If you wanted to be Gold Star student, you could help facilitate the Web Junction courses. So if this was something, if they wanted to take on learning, doing the Web Junction courses as a way to boost their staff's skills, you could be maybe a guest speaker. You could come in and help talk about those partnerships, do a practice, reference interview, and kind of talk about some of their answers and how, if that makes the most sense from a legal perspective. So I would say be bold, make the first move, reach out to your public library and see how you could help partner with them. And there is a tip sheet. So that URL that you see in the yellow there is the best sort of one-stop place to access a lot of what I've said. So you can access the courses, some of the examples of partnerships we've written up as articles, and you can see how to facilitate the courses and the tip sheet of how to partner. So I hope that was helpful to you all, and I'm really glad to listen to the rest of our speakers.
Thank you so much, Brooke. I used to do in-service training to our local public library when I worked at the county law library. So I'm really glad to see that you've made such a big effort to do it in such a more formal way and in a more broad way across the country. Before we get to the other speakers, I'm going to take about 5 minutes and give some past history about what's been done in county law libraries in Georgia, just so you can have some background. So I spent 15 years assisting self-represented litigants at the Dougherty County Law Library. And the first 14 years that I worked there, I was doing it single-handedly as a solo law librarian. So when I was first hired, the chief judge of Superior Court, Lauren Gray, asked me to create simple forms packets for the self-represented litigants. So I did that, and as word spread that the law library would help, more and more people sought forms and assistance from me. And because I'm a lawyer and I also have a master's in library science, that combination gave me a unique set of skills that allowed me to serve the self-represented litigants very effectively. The National Justice for All movement began in 2015 with a joint resolution by the Conference of Chief Justices, and the Conference of State Court Administrators. So in response, Access to Civil Justice experts launched the Justice for All initiative, also known as JFA. They created a national JFA advisory committee of thought leaders such as judges, court administrators, legal aid organizations, bar associations, access to justice commissions, and others. The Public Welfare Foundation funded grants to support JFA pilot projects. Georgia was one of 7 states chosen from 25 applicants for the first round of grants. Our vision was based on the 2012 article by Access to Justice pioneer Richard Zorza called The Sustainable 21st Century Law Library: Vision, Deployment, and Assessment for Access to Justice. Because not every county in Georgia has a county law library, we had envisioned a system of regional hub self-help centers based in county law libraries. In the first 5 years of the pilot project, the Southwest Georgia Legal Self-Help Center's small staff assisted over 28,000 individual patrons and co-hosted community events in rural communities around South Georgia with bar associations and other access to justice organizations. During the pandemic, the law library stayed open and continued assisting people remotely. We had 2 interrelated problems that plagued our efforts. One was the scarcity of county law libraries led to a lack of institutional support. Most Georgia counties don't have a county law library, and most of those county law libraries that are there don't have staff who are trained to meet the needs of self-represented litigants. So as a result, they've been unable to demonstrate how valuable a properly staffed courthouse law library can be for access to justice efforts. Then the second problem we had was an inability to secure long-term funding. Dougherty County is an area of persistent poverty with no local foundations that can support the self-help center. And county law library funding is set by state statute. And for various reasons, it's not been practical to make any changes with that. So inflation and other funding issues eroded the buying power of the Dougherty County Law Library, and they became unable to afford a full-time law librarian. So after 15 years of helping and fighting for self-represented litigants, I was really worn out with compassion fatigue. And so I was ready for a change. So I took this job as genealogy librarian at Northwest Public Library here in Albany. No one organization, entity, or group of people can fill the justice gap because there's just so many self-represented litigants who need help and their needs are so severe. So my takeaway points for you would be, due to the complexity of legal problems faced by self-represented litigants, the staff helping them need to have some legal knowledge and training so that they can quickly diagnose the type of problem and match people with the best source of information. So I'm really glad that we have these Web Junction classes who are seeking to do that. And as they do this, the staff cannot give legal advice or create an attorney-client relationship. And then another thing to keep in mind is that anyone who's helping self-represented litigants is going to face emotional stress and compassion fatigue, because many of the problems are just heartbreaking with the stories that you hear. So let's first hear from Mac Freeman, President-elect of the Georgia Library Association. Mac, could you tell us about how there was a conference that you attended where you said that libraries are now the social safety net for this country? Can you tell us a bit more about that statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
you for having me today. So yeah, and just up top, I'm here in my capacity as the president-elect of the Georgia Library Association and not associated with my day job. But so Georgia's got about 11 million people in it, and 41% of those people have library cards. In 2022, they visited the libraries around this state 14 million times. They circulated millions of items and all of this sort of thing. And libraries have 409 facilities within the state of Georgia. They're ubiquitous. There's at least one in every county. In a lot of ways that there are all sorts of services that aren't in every county. Like we heard earlier that like there's not a lawyer in every county, or there's not significant enough legal presence. And so the library staff are there. And there's about 2,800 public library staff in the state of Georgia, about full-time equivalents. And so they're doing a lot of this work ad hoc as it is, so they're just trying to help the person in front of them. So whether it's providing legal assistance or teaching a child how to read or participating in workforce development issues, these people broadly got into this work because they want to help. They want to engage their communities and they want to be there for them. But also they can't be masters of everything. And so what I was saying about the social safety net is basically, as more and more things get cut and as services get more and more threadbare, and as more and more, especially rural counties, keep losing population, the avenues that are available for people to seek assistance, especially people who are low technology, are declining all the time. And that doesn't mean that their needs are any less. It just means that their avenues of places to go are much less. And so the public library really can help out in a lot of these instances. But as our previous presenters have said, there is a lot of worry about what sort of legal advice they can truly provide and what is sort of there. And that may I said that there's, about 2,800 people here, but like across all those visits, that's each employee dealing with about 60 people a day. So, it's also a matter of, libraries are not dead. The facts of our demise have been greatly exaggerated, but it's also, how do we deal with all of that love when there's only so many people? And a lot of people, they work in libraries, but maybe they don't have the librarian background. Only about 600 MLS holders are employed by Georgia's public libraries. The rest are generally frontline staff or specialists in other areas. So how do we make sure that everybody has this common set of knowledge that's useful for that? And so I think that libraries can be an enormous force for good in the world. It's why I decided to join libraries for my career. But, and their ubiquity makes them powerful. There are more libraries in this country than there are McDonald's. And so if you think they're everywhere, your local library has them beat by a factor of 5. So that's why I get excited about libraries. And that's why I think that it can be a really powerful part of being part of this conversation.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Marquita, you were a librarian in Clayton County, and you were using libraries in innovative ways. Could you tell us something about the skilled trades training that you brought to your former library, and any other ideas about using public libraries in innovative ways?
Absolutely. So the program that you are referencing is the free trade skill training program through a company called Interplay Learning. The Clayton County Library System was the first library system to offer that particular training from that organization to its patrons at no charge to them. Interplay is the leading provider of trade skills training in 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and virtual reality format. And looking at that, I tried to leverage virtual reality. As we know, that is one innovative feature that public libraries and some academic libraries as well are using to engage public patrons as well as students and even faculty in some cases. And so I wanted to try to leverage that, but also couple it with the trends that I saw within Clayton County, which was the decreasing amount of properly trained trades men and women that was decreasing not only in Clayton County, but across the US as well. A lot of the people who are currently skilled or master trades people are baby boomers, and a lot of them are retiring. They don't want to take the risk of, climbing high ladders or buildings or anything like that. So there was definitely a need for that. And I felt like Interplay was one of the ways that we could leverage that, not only to increase, again, workforce development, but to provide an alternate way or an alternate career path for rising juniors and seniors, as well as those that were impacted by the pandemic. We launched Interplay right at, at the peak of the pandemic. And so a lot of the people that we had participated in the first round were laid off. They were looking for alternative ways to make a little extra cash. They were looking for ways to now support themselves. One participant in particular was a 72-year-old woman. She owned a property and she felt like she was being taken advantage of. So she took a plumbing module and was able to go into the properties that she owned and fix some of the plumbing issues herself. So that's just one way that public libraries contribute in a myriad of ways, in addition to providing information to people.
Okay, thank you for that. Kate, could you tell us something about the library that you're currently working at, and the types of services that you're offering to the community?
Yeah, sure thing. So I am the head of the Washington Memorial Library. We're here in Macon, Georgia. Fact check me on this, but I think it's about the 5th largest city in Georgia. And as a library, we see about 7,000 to 9,000 visits per month for the people that are coming in to our front doors. And what we provide for them is a 40 computer lab for the public, Wi-Fi that doesn't have a password, computer classes, and then also on-demand computer help. We have Libby, Hoopla, and Canopy, which are some of our digital resources where you can be able to download books onto your phone and either read them in an ebook format or listen to them on audiobook. We have a notary. We do faxing, scanning, copying, and of course, printing. That's one of our biggest pulls here. We have children's programming every day of the week. We have a genealogy and local history department that houses a lot of our older local records and historical facts and everything else that you could think of. We have a memory lab for converting digital material. And our biggest thing that we do here, as what Mac Freeman had already kind of said, is, as well as Brooke Doyle, is we fill the gaps. And there's not just a justice gap. I have a background working in New York, specifically New York City. So when I moved here to Macon, I saw a very different socioeconomic style. And one of the huge gaps that I saw wasn't just a literacy gap. but it was literacy within business, within nonprofits, financial literacy, and then again, legal literacy. So here at the library, we have just started, as of last Monday, trying to provide programs specifically addressing the justice gap. And this was kind of a wonderful opportunity because it fell into my lap. Specifically, Bill Adams. He's an advocate that just kind of walked in the doors of the library and said, "Hi, I have something that I can help with." He had been a judge of the State Court of Bibb County for quite some time, and is now running Middle Georgia Justice. He ended up connecting the library with Elizabeth Waller of the Georgia Legal Services Program, and they are beginning to create small programs to be able to address people's immediate needs, as well as pull people to a referral within their nonprofits that they're running. Now, again, as an advocate, Bill Adams was able to help me with the history of my library as well, and my library's connection to the Macon-Bibb County Law Library. So back in the day, the Macon-Bibb County Law Library kind of imported their collection into the Washington Memorial Library. And since that time, there's been a little lack of oversight. So I have to brush up and make sure our codicils are up to date and try to figure out a way to get a Westlaw kiosk back in our library so that we can better help the public. But again, it was someone walking in the door and saying, "Hey, I know how I can help you," that made all of this happen. We have 2 more programs scheduled for the 27th, and then I think also the 10th of July. And then hopefully we can build out even more of a referral process and get people the help they need, where we're not just giving them information that we can't interpret.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. That's great. So I'm going to throw this question out to the entire panel, to anybody who'd like to answer it. Do you think that local public libraries filling in or helping to meet the needs of self-represented litigants and trying to close the justice gap, do you think that's a good idea for your particular community? And do you think it would be well received? To anybody who wants to, anybody who has a comment.
I mean, I can talk again. Public librarians do not have time. We are trying to fill as many answers to questions as possible, and we do the best that we can. But being able to have that backup where you can connect someone to a professional is fantastic. And it's a great confidence boost for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add on to that the partnership is really going to be the way to go, because librarians are great at getting you to the expert, but we have this bad tendency of trying to be the expert in everything. And like Kate was saying, everybody's just kind of overwhelmed. You know, I mean, we're just coming out of COVID ourselves, and so like every industry, we're readjusting. And so it's a lot, and it's a lot that people are trying to take on. But I think that there are definitely people who would be interested in advocates. The kind of catch-22 of something like this is the libraries that are more likely to have the space and the time to do it are going to be your more urban areas that have bigger staffs and bigger budgets, just because it's a higher population. But maybe that's not where the resource deserts are as much. So I still think that there is, you know, stuff that people can learn to refer it to, but it is a bit of a hard sell with how much people already have going on.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any comment on that? Well, if not, so what about the idea that the poorest communities are that's where the legal deserts are, and that's where the public libraries also have fewer resources to try to fill in the justice gap. So how could we help those poorest communities? Are there any innovative ways that we could come up with to help those places?
I mean, I can talk again. So I think that courses like that Brooke was talking about are a great start. I also think that the state library service, the GPLS, does a pretty good job of focusing resources into rural areas and helping out, especially with technology. A lot of that tech funding is federal. And so there is support for broadband internet access through the E-rate program, through, for more modern computers. So I think that like virtual, I don't know that people have to be in the room to provide help. I think that that may be unrealistic, considering that it can be really hard to get around the state of Georgia. It's huge. And so, but I think that helping people, but setting up a private space, setting up a secure area where people could talk or participate virtually, that may be more of an option. And especially as we, kind of keep going and more technical options are available. And even, even courts online these days, there are a lot of options that I think that can be leveraged for that puts librarians more in their wheelhouse of technical support, teaching tools, connecting people where they live, rather than a whole new data set that might be beyond their abilities.
Yeah, I would just chime in that there have been some really great examples of using technology. I mean, it was happening before the pandemic, and then the pandemic made it be the only option. And I mean, we even were hearing that the phone makes more sense than Zoom, because for some folks, they're not going to have a Zoom connection. They're not going to have good enough internet from their house, but they can navigate on the phone. And but the library's role there is being that matchmaker. So finding the legal aid providers, finding the pro bono lawyers, and then having the patrons coming in with the problem and making that connection. So I agree with Mac that would be maybe a great place to start. And maybe it's, I mean, I think the expungement and workforce development avenue can be really a nice, some good synergy there with what public libraries really do a lot of.
We've had expungement clinics here at Northwest Library before, and it's always crowds of people that come to those because that's such a great need. So,
I mean,
Kate, what comments did you have?
Life-changing an expungement.
Yes, exactly.
So I would actually suggest something extremely low tech. Public libraries specifically are some of the places where you do find the poorest communities, especially the people who have home insecurity or who are homeless. This is one of the last places within our social construct where you can come and loiter all day and not pay money. So on that level of someone walking into the library because there's air conditioning, I would suggest going extremely low tech with pamphlets, with handouts, with something that can be left on a shelf and someone can explore on their own. I know within the justice gap, there's a huge moment where people don't even realize they have an issue that can be solved in legal terms. So having that information there is a fantastic help, not only for public servants who are within the library, but the people who are truly suffering and don't even know that they have other options. So paper is a great way to start.
I actually want to plus one that, and also just toss on the notion of, Kate brought up this concept of like a third space. This is, a place where you can go and you don't have to spend money. And I think that we also need to think that these people who are facing this gap often have really poor relationships with the government, that often the institution is very intimidating, and the library as an extension of that institution can be intimidating. So I think that also something that public librarians can offer is that they treat everybody with compassion and respect. And that's just an industry standard, but it's not something that a lot of these people who are consistently facing these gaps are experiencing in their interactions with the broader bureaucracy. They get told no a lot, they get shut down a lot, they get sent all over everywhere. And so, just somebody being willing to take the time and to slow down with people can make them feel like they're not alone, even if they're, what we're actually able to offer them is maybe a little bit lower.
Yeah, I would totally second that. I think that taking the time, you know, I mean, we've heard stories, especially when all the eviction moratorium was happening and there was rental assistance and this COVID money to do all that. There was just a lot of paperwork to navigate, and folks didn't have email addresses. I mean, that's, you know, they didn't have an email address. So you had to start with that, like super basic, and go from there. And, you know, librarians were really playing that digital navigator role and holding people's hands and really like getting them through this process. But it's slow and it's methodical, and it's, it just takes time, and librarians are really trained in that. And to echo Kate's point, I mean, like a tenants' rights brochure, that's a really common thing that a tenants' rights group might have in your community. That's a great thing to leave on a desk. A little legal aid pamphlet of here are the things we can help you with. I mean, those are really great leave behinds. And that could be, you know, for the attorneys on the call here, like, when you show up and say, hi, I'm interested in talking to you about what you do around legal reference, bring those pamphlets and leave them. It's a great sort of leave behind for you in that first gesture of partnership.
Okay. Marquita?
So yeah, so just echoing what everyone else has said, but taking it a step further, I think that, you know, we've touched on how librarians and library staff are overwhelmed. Again, Mac mentioned that we're coming out of COVID. And so there's, you know, pressures all around. One of the things that a branch librarian did in my old system at Clayton County is that she engaged, she had a civic engagement series. And so once a month, there would be different classes that we offered in a hybrid format. So they were offered in person as well as virtually. So literally anyone who had access could watch them. If they were able to come in person, they were also more than welcome to come as well. But we leveraged the people in the community, and we relied on their expertise and their experiences, and just kind of let them lead those classes. We provided the structure, we provided, you know, the technological support, and of course promotion. But we took the library staff as far out of it as possible, with the exception of pulling reference materials. If there were handouts that were available, we printed multiple copies and had those readily available as well. But I think leveraging the people in your community, again, the hard part is finding those people. But once we did 1 or 2 classes and the word got out, more and more people began to contact that branch librarian. And it just made it much more easier to step into spaces where you wouldn't ordinarily find your public library representatives.
Okay. So for the entire panel, if there's a public library or a community that wants to start a program of using the public library to fill in the justice gaps, any words of wisdom for someone who wants to start something like that? My comment is, with my experience with the Dougherty County Law Library, and also having been heavily involved with the Dougherty Circuit Bar Association, the bar celebrates Law Day on May 1st every year. And I used to do a partnership with the local public library, and I would get lawyers to come to this sort of a lawyer in the library type thing. And we would have lectures once a week during the month of Law Day. And that was a way of connecting the bar with the public library. Does anybody else have any ideas for anybody who wants to start such a program? Mac?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this. So before I had my current gig, I was a public librarian for 10 years, and I managed several libraries in Gwinnett County. And I will say that if you are somebody who's not a library person who wants to come in and do something, making your ask really clear can be very helpful. So like if you come in and say, I want to come in and I want to partner on the justice gap, as a manager of a library, I don't know what that means and what you need from me. And so like if you're coming in, it's like, and we need a meeting room, or I need you to set up some tables, or we need a private space, or we need a computer, like that's all doable. Whereas like we want to solve a very broad problem is the goal, but it's hard to do. And so I think that can be really helpful. In my experience, in my personal experience, in my experience with my colleagues, most people want to say yes. They get excited, you know, like I said, they got into this field because they want to help people, and like we see the need all the time. So it's helping people get to yes. Also, I will say, if you are going into a county that's, or a library that's in a system in the state of Georgia, many of our more rural areas are in multi-county systems. The person who can say yes to the partnership may not be in that building. So like, they can always hear your interest, but they may have to refer it up the chain to somebody. So don't let that get you discouraged. It just, or if like you come in on a Saturday, maybe the manager's not there. So don't get discouraged by that, but just, leave your information, they'll get back, because I think that there is a lot of value that can be done with this. But that's kind of where I would start. And like, if somebody came in with that, for me, like, I would be over the moon and it would be already halfway to yes.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for that. Did anybody else have any words of wisdom to someone who wants to start a program like that in the community, whether they're in the legal community or the library community? Yes, Kate.
Well, I'll definitely talk to how Bill was able to get my interest. It was sending me a link to WebJunction's Creating Pathways to Civil Legal Justice. Yes, it is a lot of information at once, but it does give a really clear pathway on what libraries can do to be able to help with this one of many gaps that we're trying to fill.
Okay, well, that's a great idea because this is really good training.
Yes.
Marquita?
I would definitely say one key piece of advice is to make sure that when you're reaching out to your community constituents or someone that you want to bring in for partnerships, that person represents the community that your library system serves as closely as possible. As a Black librarian, I won't get into statistics, but the library field does not have a lot of people. It is not a large percentage of people who look like me, who talk like me, who come from the background that I'm in. And so it was mentioned earlier about how the general public has a very deep fear of the government and any kind of legal entities. As a person of color, even though I have, no criminal background whatsoever, there is that inherent fear of authority when you're just kind of out living your life. And so I think it helps to have representation that looks like you, that can speak to your culture, that can speak to your lived and often trauma-filled experiences. And so one of the things that my former library system did was they went out and they found not only a partner who looks like the community, but also lives in the community and has represented members of the community to come in and do monthly events, specifically around something that is critical to that county. A large part of the citizens within Clayton County are older, so they're seniors. They're in retirement. They're thinking about their remaining years, their mortality. What are they going to do with the housing that they own? A lot of them own property, but didn't know how to either gift it to a charity or leave it to someone. And so we found a lawyer who is well versed in all of those things, in living wills, in trust, in powers of attorney. And she comes in once a month to this day, as a matter of fact, and does monthly free advice for those citizens.
Well, that's wonderful. Those are really good points. I appreciate that, especially about the trauma, because a lot of people who have the legal needs are going through traumatic situations. So we've got 5 minutes. Are there any questions from attendees? Are there any questions in the chat?
I guess I'll ask Kate a question if she doesn't mind. So
Sure.
You've been working frontline in the public libraries, kind of coming out of COVID. What are you seeing as being like on the rise as needs that are coming up more often than they did in the past?
Well, one of the big things that we're kind of trying to tackle currently is Georgia Gateway, being able to sign up for SNAP and having the reevaluation of Medicaid. That's one of our current struggles, but we have We have as much of a partnership as possible with our local offices within Georgia Gateway, and then we've created our own content to be able to not only train our frontline staff, who are mostly paraprofessional and have been at the library under 2.5 years, to be able to provide this service while not overstepping a line of providing information yet not providing advice. So that's a very current struggle that I'm dealing with today. I can talk about last week if you want to. But the other thing that we're seeing, and I know that it's specific to being in Macon itself, is both a mental health and home insecurity issue that we're having here. And that is very quickly blooming into a large social problem. What we're trying to do is partner with as many mental health nonprofits in the area as possible. And again, work on my staff's resiliency and finding ways to feed their souls to not have compassion fatigue. So those are my current struggles.
There's one question in the chat which might be too much to answer, but I'll put it out there anyway. How would you advise someone with a mobile library to adapt to provide these sort of services for a library on the road? It seems like a whole new class right there.
Have a referral system. Have something that you can put in someone's hand and say, okay, call this number. You're going to have Bernice on the phone on the other end, and she is going to walk you through what they can do for you. And if they cannot help you, they will find someone else for you to call and talk to. That is the easiest handoff to do, where you can have the knowledge, give them the information, and then try to prepare them for what they're going to need to do action-wise.
Great. So our time has come to an end. It's time to end. I want to thank the panelists, all of the panelists. This was such a wonderful class, and I really appreciate the nod to simplicity, which gives me an opportunity to talk about quickly. Judge Tabitha Ponder has worked really hard to try to make simple forms, building on a lot of the work that Lorraine's already done, but not just on an Albany scale, on a statewide scale. And she's gotten 2 forms, divorce and divorce with children, in a simple way, approved by the Council of Superior Court Judges, and so that form should be allowed to be used. And it makes me think we probably should make that form available to all the libraries so people know that that form exists and that as a form that can be submitted. And she is hard with Deontay at work on a landlord-tenant form. So that would be a way that people could represent themselves in a simple way. And so that also will be on our website, which is georgiacourts.gov. And so I am closing us out. This is our last class for our Minding the Justice Gap series. Thank you so much, Professor Darcy Meals and the Georgia State School of Law Access to Justice Center, for being our partners hosting this series this year. It's been a delight. And we're saying goodbye to Nat for now. And may all of you have a wonderful summer and a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.